guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and this is the Ohio Ordnance HCAR, the Heavy Counter Assault Rifle, which is really a pretty generous name, a pretty ambitious name for what is essentially a tactical-looking, or a tacticalized, modernized version of the BAR in semi-auto. So this comes from Ohio Ordnance, and for a long time they've been making a semi-automatic clone of the original World War II pattern BAR. They call it the 1918 A3. The A2 is what we used in World War II, so they took the moniker A3. Now, when they started making these, they were using cast receivers, and at the time, every once in a while, they'd get a receiver back that had some casting flaws in it. Now, they could have welded those up, polished them down, and used the receiver anyway, but the flaw would show in the eventual finish. And they were charging a lot of money for these guns. They had a really beautiful blued finish to them, and so they didn't want to use these potentially aesthetically flawed receivers. And so they piled up in a connex at Ohio Ordnance. Well, skip forward a little bit. Bob Landy's over there starts thinking about, like, we've got a significant amount of value in these ready, not fully finished receivers. What can we do with them? And that's where the idea of the HCAR comes from. Let's modernize it. Let's lighten the BAR. Let's adapt it to more of today's rifle standards. So in the immediate effect is he milled out sections of the receiver to lighten it, which also took away all the areas that had casting flaws and made these receivers totally perfectly usable. He then went ahead and shortened the barrel. This is a 20-inch version. There's also an 18-inch version. Dimpled the barrel to reduce its weight without creating any potential stress concentrations like you could with a fluted barrel. Gave it Picantinny rails all over the place, a collapsible stock, a pistol grip, which is a really nice addition, modernized controls, and really turned it into, this is sort of a sci-fi what-if rifle. This was not intended to be a military rifle. This is intended to be a cool, fun rifle to enjoy. And I think it does a fantastic job of that. So, by the way, I would like to give a big thanks to Hub City Outdoors. This is their R1 chest rig, but it is specifically made for me for BAR magazines for the HCAR instead of the standard 7.62 NATO magazines, because these are about a half-inch longer than a 7.62 NATO magazine. All right, let's go ahead and dig into this a little deeper. We've got our markings up here, same place that they are on the military BARs, and you can see heavy counter assault rifle. It's a rather fanciful name, but it sounds pretty cool. So manufactured by Ohio Ordnance Works. So for features, let's go ahead and start at the muzzle and work our way back. Right up front, we have a very short muzzle brake that was specifically designed by Ohio Ordnance, and their idea here was that the gun is a pretty long pike to begin with, especially the 20-inch barreled version. There's no need to have like a 3-inch long compensator on the end of it when you can get really the same effective recoil reduction from a really short stubby brake like that. So really the only downside to it is the concussion that it generates for people around the shooter.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible to be near.
Yes, that is Jordan, who just got to have lots of fun standing alongside it, filming the shooting segment of this video. So yeah, that's the downside. It is standard threading under here, so you can take this off, you can replace it with whatever device you want, flash hider, brake, suppressor, whatever. We have a 3-position gas regulator down here, so center, and you've got a low and a high gas position. So essentially, especially if you are putting on a suppressor, that adjustability comes in handy. The length of the barrel is dimpled like this to reduce weight. I asked Ohio Ordnance why they didn't do fluting, which is kind of a more typical, traditional way to reduce the weight on a barrel without reducing its overall diameter. And the answer basically was Bob Landy's at Ohio Ordnance doesn't really like fluting. He sees a potential for stress concentrations in the long flutes and found that this was just as effective at reducing weight. It increases the surface area for cooling, although that's really not a major concern for a semi-auto rifle like this. It is funny that he did this at exactly the same time and independently of Knight's Armament doing it on some of their rifles. So it turns out Knight's has actually patented this system, this style of weight reduction. So Ohio Ordnance, well, Bob went and talked to Reed Knight and got basically a letter of understanding that there's no problem with Ohio Ordnance using this as well. But it's funny that the two of them came up with that idea simultaneously and independently. Now the handguard has some cool stuff going on. So You've got rails on the side and bottom. I like to use this to drop a little lightweight bipod onto. We also have a rail up on top. I've seen a lot of people suggest that this rail should be continuous. Frankly, that is a bit of a, it's difficult to do with the design, because remember that these receivers are originally made as 1918 A3, you know, historical reproduction receivers. So adding a bunch of material up here is not really super simple. It would add a lot to the cost, and I don't think you really get all that much benefit from having the rail extend across there. In addition, it would still be part on the receiver and part on the handguard anyway. The checkering on here is very, very aggressive. This is almost sharp, not quite sharp, but it's very aggressive checkering. Frankly, I kind of like that. I think the crude way to say it would be, I guess, if you can't handle that the checkering's a little too pointy, maybe you shouldn't be running a BAR in the first place. But the genesis of this is in fact on the original BARs, which have very, it's obviously not nearly as aggressive because it's just cut in wood and it's flat topped, but they have this very distinctive heavy checkering on the fore end of the gun. And so Ohio Ordnance basically took this pattern as an homage to the original BARs. I think that's really cool. The controls are very much improved from a modern perspective over the original BAR. So our original gun has safe, automatic, and fire here with a rotary lever. Normally you would actually have, this button would come out and you'd have to depress it to put the gun into safe. The owner of this gun has disabled that system just to make it a little bit easier to work with. On the HCAR, we have a much more modern style of safety lever there, and obviously it only needs two positions, safe and fire. Unfortunately, to me, it is not an ambidextrous lever, so it's only on the left side, so it's great for your right thumb if you're right-handed, not quite so useful for a lefty. The magazine release is now a lever right here. You just pull that forward and you can pop the magazine out. The original BARs had a really awful magazine release in the front of the trigger guard there. So the original BARs don't have a bolt release at all because they don't need one. They fire from an open bolt and you're never in a position of needing the bolt release. One of the neat things about the HCAR that's a little bit unusual is it will lock open when there is no magazine in the gun. So I can close it, lock it open. Note that we have a folding, non-reciprocating charging handle there, and the gun's locked open again. It doesn't do this on an empty magazine because there is no follower tab on the BAR magazine. The magazine itself was not designed to lock open when empty. So you don't get that, but you can lock it open just by taking the magazine out, which is kind of cool. So sort of in homage to my joke about this being the XM5 we have at home, I went ahead and mounted one of Sig Sauer's Tango 6 scopes on it. This is one of Sig's military contract overrun scopes with the titanium base. It's a 1:6 LPVO. It's a great scope, and I think it fits this rifle really well. I like the idea of having some magnification. To me, this isn't really ideal as a lightweight, short, high-speed run-and-gun sort of thing because it's not lightweight or short or high-speed, really. And giving it some magnification with a cartridge like 30-06 really makes sense to me. Obviously, we also have a pistol grip here. Big improvement over the original BARs, in my opinion, and even Colt and FN recognize this. In the 20s and 30s, Colt and FN were both selling their modern BARs at that time with pistol grips. Just the US Army chose to not ever adopt this. By the way, these wings are the magazine insertion guides, and they are a direct holdover from the 1918 A2 World War II version of the American military BAR. Now, our last bit at the very back, we have a Magpul collapsing stock, so you can set your length of pull wherever you prefer it. There's a cheek riser here because that rail does add significant height to the optics. I don't find it particularly awkward, but largely because there is that cheek riser there to help out. And then down here, we have a little added block that goes onto the back of the receiver. So that's there because the original BARs, the back of the receiver actually cants down at just a shallow angle. And there is a friction ring and spring buffer in the back here to absorb the energy of the bolt slamming into the back of the receiver. Now, Ohio Ordnance, in addition to making semi-auto BARs, also makes Mag 58s for military contract. And so they were already making Mag 58 hydraulic buffers, and they decided that would be really a much better system, also a much cheaper system to make, I expect, since it was already in production. And so they added a block to the back of the receiver that takes that slight downward cant and straightens it out to be horizontal in line with the barrel, and then put in a Mag 58 hydraulic buffer for recoil absorption. And it does a really good job. These are really pleasant rifles to shoot. All right, for disassembly, we have 3 pins here. There you go, 3 pins. This one holds the handguard on. These hold the trigger group on. So let me go ahead and pull those off. Punches out. There we go. These are captive pins, so I just pull them out until they snap, and then I can, oops, probably should have put the bolt forward first, but that takes care of itself. There is the fire control group. This is polymer to help lighten it, and we've got a semi-auto hammer-fired system in here, so substantially different firing control system than the original full-auto open bolt BARs had. Note we also have the bolt hold open added here, so a control that wasn't in the original BARs. For comparison's sake, here's a 1918 A2 fire control group. Here's our HCAR. So you can see that what we have in the A2 is basically just a sear that gets pivoted down to release the bolt, where on the HCAR we actually have a separate hammer-fired assembly. If I pop out this 3rd front pin, I can then take the handguard off the front of the gun. There's that. Notice they have also lightened up the operating slide here by punching a whole bunch of holes in it. Now, this video is getting relatively long, so I'm going to leave the disassembly alone because at this point, it's basically the same as the standard 1918 A2 BARs. What you have to do is you push the spring guide in here, rotate it out of the way, you can pull the spring out. You then punch the center pin out that locks the bolt and the slide together. Take that out. You then have to hold this little tab open because the bolt and, well, the bolt itself has to come out through the bottom of the receiver this way because on these guns you can't take them out through the back. So this is a really obnoxiously complex and tricky disassembly that, frankly, FN figured out and improved by the early 1930s with the FN Model D, but the US Army just stuck with this system all the way through the end of production at the end of World War II. Overall, with the HCAR here, what we have is a really fun rifle to shoot. Recoil is very pleasant, reliability is good, accuracy is quite good, the trigger pull is good. It is a really fun, like, what if historical future reproduction sort of concept around the BAR. And it really does solve a lot of the like the ergonomic problems of the BAR. Now, it's a pretty darned expensive rifle, and that's because it is in low production. Virtually all of these parts are being manufactured new. The BAR was not a cheap gun for the US military to be buying in World War I or World War II. But what you get here is really the modern interpretation of one of John Browning's truly iconic and long-lived designs. So I think it's a lot of fun. Armor defeated by armor piercing. That is the point of black tip 30-06. So this is a standard competition target. It's 3/8 of an inch AR 500 hardened steel, and black tip 06 doesn't always go completely through it, but sometimes it does, and when it doesn't, man, it takes a gnarly chunk out of that stuff. That was on an angled steel target. Let's try it on just a perpendicular flat one. I see lots of daylight. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you with 3/8 of an inch thick AR 500 target rated armored steel, which when met by armor piercing ammunition loses. This is not quite the immovable object meets the irresistible force. This is the actually surprisingly movable object meets 30-06 black tip. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This was a lot of fun to put together. The gun's a tremendous amount of fun to shoot. I do want to once again give a big thanks to Hub City Outdoors for the sweet chest rig specific to the BAR, and also to my friend Kevin for letting me use his absolutely beautiful M1918 World War I BAR in the intro sequence. Thanks for watching.